first, allow me to express my most profound regrets for being late. I had an interview run late and then had the fun experience of traveling on the Beltway, which I think may be sometimes more stressful than driving in Iraq because I'm not allowed to carry a weapon on the Beltway. So as my introducer mentioned, I am also a veteran, and before I get started, I want to take a brief moment to thank all of you for coming. I really appreciate you taking the time to get out before we are inundated with snow, have a little bit of fun before we get started. And to all the troops and veterans in the room, I want to say welcome home. And to all the military families, I want to say thank you for your service as well. So I enlisted in the Army in 2000, and although I knew that I read the fine print, I understood the armies went to war, it really didn't seem like a very big possibility back then. And I was needs of the Army, random chance, assigned Arabic, and was studying it at the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, California on 9/11. So it was immediately apparent that my military career was going to be profoundly different than I might otherwise have expected. It was no longer a question of whether or not I would go to war, simply when and where. I took part of the initial invasion of Iraq as part of the 101st Airborne Division, Air Assault, and after spending some time in Baghdad, going out on combat foot patrols with the infantry without plates in my flak vest, because as a woman soldier, I surely wouldn't have needed them, we pushed farther north to Mosul and beyond, and I was eventually assigned to an LPOP, a listening post observation post on the side of Sinjar Mountain, and was the only female soldier with about 7 male soldiers. We moved to the other side of the mountain later, and there were maybe 20 or 30 men there. Again, I was the only female soldier for several more months of relative isolation. While I was out there, I met this tall, handsome NCO. He was in charge of the observation post side of things, a group of, they were so proud to call themselves Fisters, the fire support team. And I thought he was funny and handsome, witty, sarcastic, smart, but Iraq is not romantic. We couldn't exactly start dating, couldn't go clubbing or anything like that. So any sort of flirtation that we had was very, very gruff and not at all the type of gentle romantic flirtation that you might imagine here at home. One night on the side of the mountain, I confessed to him that I really wanted to get to know him better. And he said, "Don't worry, there's plenty of time for that when we get home." And it wasn't too long after that that his convoy on his way back from mid-tour leave was hit in one of the first really coordinated attacks of what later came to be known as the insurgency. But in those early days, we did not yet call it that. We just wondered what the hell was going on, since we were supposed to be in SASO, or Stability and Support Operations. Shrapnel entered his skull below his Kevlar on the back of the right side of his head, traveled forward, and exited near his right eye. For 3 days, we were all told not to expect him to survive. He was medically evacuated, luckily, down to Baghdad, where he had neurosurgery by, as chance would have it, the same neurosurgeon who later operated on Bob Woodruff. From there, he was evacuated to Landstuhl in Germany, and from there back to Walter Reed Army Medical Center. I stayed in Iraq and completed my mission. Heard from Brian a few months later in an email that was full of the type of typos and punctuation and spelling errors that I think a lot of people slip into an email. So I just let that go. I thought, oh, he's just being lazy like people are in email, and didn't really have any sense of what it meant to have a traumatic brain injury. And when he said, looks like I'm going to be okay, I just took that at face value. These were the early days of the war, and what wouldn't have thought then would be the early days of the war, but they were. And the systems and services that returning wounded warriors needed were really not in place. So when he had recovered to a point at which, as the doctors told him, he could walk and talk and wipe his own ass, he was released from Walter Reed and sent back to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, where the 101st is based. He got there about 2 weeks before the rest of the division got back from the Middle East. And we started dating the day that my plane landed, February 8th, 2004, so just over a decade ago. And I'm sure there were signs then of his cognitive and psychological problems, but I was pretty distracted by my own reintegration and did not necessarily notice them. And we were busy partying and getting drunk and staying up all night because we had a month of block leave. So in that heady early time when we were just thrilled to be alive and getting drunk a lot, didn't notice what was coming. And we were very quickly, deeply emotionally involved. Then I started going back to work, and I had to get up bright and early every morning to go and do PT, and I had to go and do my job and train soldiers and get ready to redeploy, get our unit ready to go back overseas. And Brian's unit told him to stay home. He was still early enough in his recovery that he wasn't allowed to wear headgear because the wound was so fresh, where the shunt had been and where the shrapnel had entered in the back of his skull. He still had to get his head shaved at the hospital by specially trained people. And he had PTSD, that post-traumatic stress disorder, severe enough that he couldn't carry a weapon. He actually had a profile. You get a special piece of paper in the military if you can't do anything, like if you can't run for a while. So on his profile, it said he could not carry a weapon. And so his leadership said, well, you can't wear headgear, you can't carry a weapon, you're too screwed up to do your job, and you're freaking out all the new guys when they show up because you're such a disaster, so why don't you just stay home? This was not the Army that I knew, where you had to show up every morning for accountability formation and people made sure that you were where you were supposed to be. So I was really surprised that nobody was checking up on him, but they told him to stay home. And as he lost his identity as a leader of soldiers, he lost his job, he lost his place, and he was questioning his ability to have a future. He spiraled deeper and deeper into depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and everything just fell apart. He was not cognitively able to pay his bills or take care of himself, manage his own life, and he was trying to self-medicate the profound psychological pain that he was feeling with Jameson, Jack Daniels, Jim Beam, really whatever was handy. That doesn't work, but it took quite a long time for him to figure that out. And somehow I stuck with him through this. People ask me all the time how, and I have to be honest, looking back, sometimes I'm still not sure. But with a lot of patience and commitment and love, we stayed together. We got married, he did heal, and we've been able to forge a new life together. I tell that story in this book. And a lot of the early reviews focus on the fact that I'm very honest about the worst parts of that recovery. Some of the terms are making me a little freaked out that people are not going to want to buy it because they're focused on my honesty about those really bad stages. But for me, this is a story of hope, healing, recovery, and love. This is a love story, and this is a story about how my husband came back from profound injury, profound institutional neglect, and really deep physiological, cognitive, and psychological wounds to be the man that he is today, a loving husband and father who just started using his GI Bill benefits to go back to college this semester, which is an exciting new adventure for us to embark upon. The messages that I really want to get out and that I'm convinced that anyone who reads this book will absorb is that vets aren't broken. I see this kind of taking root in the popular media narrative that veterans are unemployed, suicidal, homicidal, homeless, that we're just really screwed up. And for many veterans, though certainly not all, the process of reintegration, of coming home, of healing, can be a difficult one. But with proper services and support, it can happen. And there is a new normal in which we can still be contributing members of society, valuable additions to our communities, fantastic employees. You should hire us because we are fantastic. The other message that I wanted